Hello, I'm Terry Martin. Good to have you with us. Peace talks between Ukraine and Russia are due to start this morning as Russia's invasion of its neighbor enters its fifth day. The two sides are expected to meet in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he does not expect a breakthrough, but is willing to send a delegation to try and end the war. It was calm as the sun rose over the capital, Kiev, though Ukraine said there were sporadic pre-dawn blasts there and in the second-largest city, Kharkiv. Ukraine says it's still in control of all major cities, despite the Russian onslaught in many parts of the country. Several residential buildings have been hit, and Ukraine says over 350 civilians have been killed so far.
Weapons of war at a children's playground in Kharkiv. These images uploaded to social media purportedly show Russian soldiers. The person filming says they are shooting at houses. But they run into fierce resistance. A trail of Russian reconnaissance vehicles is left smoldering as Ukrainian soldiers drive the Russian army back out of Ukraine's second-largest city. The regional governor says Kharkiv is back under Ukrainian control. The capital, Kiev, is also putting up a fight, while explosion after explosion goes off near the heart of the city. A war just outside the window. Many flee to subway stations when they hear air raid sirens.
With my family, I moved to our relatives' place because they are closer to the metro station, and there is a better opportunity to run down the metro station itself if heavy bombing take place.
In the east, apartment buildings in ruins, a gas pipeline and an oil depot in flames. In an effort to stop the destruction, Ukraine's president agrees to peace talks. The Ukrainian and Russian delegations will meet without any preconditions. Frankly speaking, I do not really believe in the outcome of the meeting. Meanwhile, new satellite images show a convoy of hundreds of Russian military vehicles approaching the capital, a sign that the fighting there may become even more intense.
Let's get the very latest from DW correspondent Fanny Facha. She's in western Ukraine in the city of Khmelnytsky. Fanny, how has the situation developed in Ukraine overnight?
Not really for the better. In fact, there were several attacks on the city of Kyiv, on the city of Kharkiv. These are major cities, of course. This is where we have seen the increase of violence, of shelling over the past few days, ever since this full-scale invasion began last week on Thursday. Now, it is really unclear how it's going to continue, but everyone, especially in Kyiv, is bracing for a major assault as amid the fact that there is assurance there by the Ukrainian president that he's going to try to negotiate, that there is this talk possibly even this morning at the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, trying to bring about at least some sort of a ceasefire. But the situation is very tense. Also here, actually, where we are right now, 3 hours west of Kyiv, sirens were blaring tonight, so we were really preparing to go to the bunker again. No explosions were heard, however, or no reports about that, but there are military units nearby. And what we can see actually coming to our position here today, a lot of families packed up early this morning trying to flee the country towards Romania, while there's an influx of refugees here to Khmelnytsky from Kiev and many other parts of Ukraine. So the situation is chaotic, actually, at this point. It is panic, nervousness, but also the hope that maybe if there really is a talk today, at least some pause can be achieved.
Fanny, we're looking at, we've seen some satellite images showing a massive Russian military convoy just outside of Kiev. This convoy is about 5 kilometers long. This suggests that a major assault could be imminent, as you mentioned. How is Kiev preparing to defend itself?
It's incredible the way people here on the ground, how they were trying to unite over the course of the past few days. In fact, just in front of me, I see people signing up to be drafted voluntarily before they actually get that phone call to go to the front line. Others are donating blood, trying to help the way they can. So if you ask an ordinary Ukrainian, they will tell you, yes, we are prepared because we are motivated. Of course, if you look at the numbers, Russian troops versus Ukrainian troops, Russian troops are superior compared to the Ukrainian defense. At the same time, however, you also have to look at the fact that so far at least Russia did not succeed to occupy any major city and did not go beyond that line in the Donbas. They occupy the self-proclaimed republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, but no further progress actually has been made, other than, of course, the increase of attacks in so many parts of Ukraine.
What about the humanitarian situation there, Fanny? We're seeing reports on social media of food shortages, supermarkets with empty shelves. What can you tell us?
We witnessed that ourselves. Obviously, we are affected in a way, in that way too. That of course we also need to get food and very basics, just like anyone else. And yes. Empty shelves, but there's still basic things available. Depends on which supermarket you go to, where you actually live, how many supermarkets are open. And the best really right now is for everyone to stock up on certain things, certain items, given could be that there is a blackout maybe inside. That means no electricity, no access to internet. So it means people are trying to actually, without overly panicking, really, because then would be even longer lines. But in a way, everyone here is bracing just to be prepared, especially those who cannot go, who cannot leave across the border. These, of course, especially men between 18 and 60 years old who have to stay. They are not allowed to leave Ukraine, but also people who simply do not have a car or enough gasoline to leave Ukraine and bring their families and themselves to a safe region.
Fanny, thank you very much for now. Our correspondent, Fanny Pachar, there in Western Ukraine. Ukrainian civilians have been pitching in to resist the Russian invasion. With their lives turned upside down, ordinary Ukrainians are getting involved in collecting donations and helping to make supplies for the army. DW correspondent Matthias Böttinger met some of the volunteers helping refugees and soldiers in the city of Vinnytsia, southwest of Kiev.
They bring everything they can spare: clothes, food, money. As refugees move west and soldiers east towards the front, here in Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, people are organizing aid for both. Natalia, who doesn't want to give her last name, leads a youth center in peacetime. She's used to organizing outings and summer camps. Now, at war, she's busy directing volunteers and sorting donations.
I
never imagined I'd be doing any of this. I'm learning all the time. We're improving our work every minute. We are getting there. Vinnytsia in central Ukraine has so far been spared heavy fighting, although air raid alarms are frequent. But like everywhere in the country, people here have been under shock since Russia attacked. Now everyone wants to contribute. A wave of solidarity is running through society. Natalia is out and about around the clock. The nightly curfew is the only time she's not on site. I can't just sit home doing nothing and just waiting. I'm also definitely not leaving. This is our home that we love, and we're not going anywhere. It's not only about donating goods. Many also contribute their time making camouflage nets for the army. Green and brown clothes are separated from the donations and cut into pieces. The rest is a lot of handiwork. The Ukrainian army has been at war for 8 years, still lacking many basic items, including protective equipment. And many here have somebody at the front: a husband, brother, sister, or, in Natalia's case, a 19-year-old son. We are in touch. I can talk to him once a day. It's those few minutes that I'm waiting for all day. Being active is also a way for many here to deal with their worries.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has put his country's deterrence forces, including its nuclear weapons system, on high alert. In a video from the Kremlin, Putin said NATO powers had made aggressive statements towards Russia. He also pointed to economic sanctions that will cut off Russian banks from international transactions.
Not only are Western countries taking unfriendly economic steps against our country, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well, but the top officials of leading NATO countries are also making aggressive statements about our country. Therefore, I order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff to put the deterrent forces of the Russian military to a special mode of combat duty.
Let's bring in Thomas Wiegold here. He's a journalist and military expert. Thanks for being with us. President Putin has put his country's deterrence forces, and I understand this includes its nuclear weapons system, on high alert. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, you would expect that any nuclear country, may be the US, France, United Kingdom, and Russia, would have their deterrence forces on alert any time. So this is more or less at this point in time a psychological operation. It's a threat, an unveiled threat against the West, because if you see the situation on the ground in Ukraine, there is no military justification for thinking about use of nuclear forces. So this means this is to deter the West, to give a threat to NATO and the US. And so far the US have said, we have no reason to change our defense conditions. We'll stay as we are, which I think is the only way to react to this.
For weeks, we've been hearing that Russia's army is far superior to that of Ukraine, but they haven't progressed as far as many had expected in Ukraine. How do you explain that?
Well, many in the West, or all in the West, have been surprised by this. There are maybe different reasons for this. One is what the Pentagon last night called the creative resistance of the Ukrainians, who are dealing with Russian forces, counter to their doctrine. They are ambushing, they are attacking support convoys, all these things. On the other hand, as we've seen in the videos from the front lines, it's not the newest Russian material, it's not the newest tanks and all this stuff which has been brought up. So either Russia is not as well equipped as everybody in the West thought over the recent years, or Russia is keeping its most modern, its best equipped troops still back and will bring them into the fight later.
I want to ask you about the steps that the EU has taken. EU members on Sunday took significant steps to prop up Ukraine's military. What difference will this make?
Well, there is a potential for indeed making a big difference. We've seen mostly anti-tank weapons, anti-tank guided missiles, Stinger, man-pads, man-portable air defense systems, and all this, which is to be distributed widely, which doesn't need long-time education and training. But on the other hand, last night, Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy head, said EU would also bring in fighter planes. I haven't seen a confirmation for this yet, but this would mean a significant difference, because Ukrainian air defense, strange enough, is still working. There is no Russian air superiority so far. That's also a surprise for most Western experts, because everybody expected that Russia would take over the skies over Ukraine within a day.
Right. Now, the Economist news outlet has suggested that the sanctions imposed on Russia, particularly on the central bank, are so crippling that the Kremlin might interpret them as an act of war. Do these sanctions have any military significance in your view?
Well, normally I would say no, but if you see the Kremlin's point of view, they might well interpret this as an act of war, and this would also partially explain the nuclear threat. We don't really know whether the Kremlin says what's happening to our banks, to our economy, is the same as a military attack, and we will react accordingly. So that's still open to interpretation.
Okay, journalist and military expert Thomas Wiegold there. Thank you so much for now.
You're welcome.
A turning point in Europe's history. That's how German Chancellor Olaf Scholz described Russia's war against Ukraine, speaking to a special session of Parliament on Sunday. Scholz announced a raft of policy changes that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Germany will spend billions beefing up its military now and reduce its dependence on Russian energy.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is moving the country away from its traditional pacifist defense and security policy to a tougher, more direct one. Shackled by its First and Second World War history, Germany has been hesitant to involve itself in conflict, but Scholz says this is a new era.
This war is a catastrophe for Ukraine, but this war will also turn out to be a catastrophe for Russia.
Russia has done the unthinkable, bringing the most aggressive military assault to Europe since World War II. At the special session of the Bundestag, Scholz announced Germany is sending 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 surface-to-air missiles directly to Ukraine instead of using a third party. It will also invest 100 billion euros in a special military fund. And after years of pushing against calls from the U.S. to invest more in NATO, Scholz announced that's happening too, hiking national defense spending to more than 2% of Germany's economic output per year.
President Putin should not underestimate our determination to defend every square meter of our alliance's territory together with our allies. We are cutting off Russian banks and state companies from financing. We are preventing the export of future technology to Russia. We are focusing on the oligarchs and their assets in the EU.
Germany and its allies hope these tough multilateral sanctions will force Russia to retreat and bring peace back to Ukraine.
I'm joined now by our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. Melinda, you were following this all along over the weekend, a major turnaround in German foreign and security policy. Walk us through this. What changes are we looking at?
Well, first of all, concretely, we're going to see Germany break with the long-standing prohibition on sending weapons to a conflict zone. So very direct support now for Ukraine. Secondly, harsh economic sanctions on Russia, not only the exclusion of some Russian banks from that SWIFT payment transfer information system, but also freezing the reserves of the Russian central bank, a very big move indeed. And thirdly, a massive increase in defense spending, something you and I have talked about for years, but that always looked like it was somewhere out there in the realm of hope, but wasn't going to happen. Underlying all of that, and this is the most important thing, is indeed a tectonic shift in perspective, away from essentially a post-World War II and post-Cold War consensus that saw Germany tie its own hands militarily, absolutely prioritize diplomacy and dialogue, see itself as surrounded by friends after 1989 with the idea that maintaining good commercial relations with everybody would ensure stability and moderation. And there's clear recognition now, the Chancellor said it, we live in a new world and we must defend our democracy if we want to preserve it.
Now, Germany is going to ramp up its military capabilities in a way that we have never seen before in the post-war period. 100 billion going in as a special fund for the Bundeswehr, more than 2% spending on GDP spending on the military moving forward, annual spending. Melinda, ramping up military capabilities is a slow process. What kind of time frame are we talking about here, and can it make any difference to the current conflict?
Well, 100 billion is double the current defense budget. So we're looking at a massive increase just within this fiscal year. That will begin to remedy some of the gaps and deficits in the Bundeswehr. And the Chancellor talked about gaps and deficits basically in all areas. Hardware, skills and capabilities, technology, meaning cyber, logistics, airplanes, boats, you name it, basically everything. And that reflects the fact that Germany essentially is an economic giant, but a military midget. So, no, that's not going to happen overnight. And he absolutely acknowledged that and said that's why we will now be investing more than 2%. 2% is the NATO target, 2% of GDP on defense spending. He said we will now be doing more than that.
And currently it's 1.5%.
Yeah, way below. Been promising to do it for years and years, since 2014. Every year Germany makes this promise. It looks like now it actually might happen. Suddenly,
overnight. I mean, it's quite a turnaround. There is a strong pacifist streak in Germany, which is understandable in light of the Second World War and the First World War, for that matter. So is that, this is particularly true on the left. The left is well represented in the current government. Is Germany jumping over its shadow now? Is it putting its pacifist streak behind it?
Yes. In fact, that's why I said I think we're seeing a break with the post-World War II consensus, a break with German thinking that's gone on for nearly 80 years. The idea being that in some ways Germany learned the lessons of World War II too well. As you know, that was a war of aggression instigated by Germany itself. And coming out of that, there was a sense that military is not a tool of policy. In other words, Clausewitz's famous dictum that military is a continuation of foreign policy by other means, that was not part of the German thinking. And we have seen a change within the Green Party as well, as you say, junior coalition partner. But they were the ones pushing this chancellor very hard to go further on weapons exports, to go further on vigilant defense spending. So I think now we're seeing also the Social Democrats, who also have that pacifist tradition, finally getting in touch with another side of their history and their roots, namely Helmut Schmidt, stationing of the Pershings. That was deterrence. That was not diplomacy. No. That was not Ostpolitik. And I think now perhaps we're seeing a very real shift on the left.
Not everybody is happy about this. I was downtown yesterday during the demonstration, seeing a lot of placards that were also saying, no rearmament in Germany. During the Bundestag session, when these huge investments in the Bundeswehr were announced, we saw particularly members of the left party not applauding for these. How much support is there within the population and within the German political establishment for these the boosting of Germany's military?
So the left party, as you say, catcalls, boos, a lot of noise during that special session of the Bundestag yesterday. On the streets, my impression is that the wake-up call definitely has been heard, but that this is a very wrenching moment for many Germans. And you could hear that in the speeches made yesterday by, in fact, all of the leaders saying, we know people are sitting around their kitchen tables. This is what the Chancellor said. Grandparents are saying, wait a minute, we thought war in Europe can't happen again. What is going on? And a clear recognition on the part, especially of Chancellor Scholz, that he needs to lead people on this journey. It's going to be a hard journey for many, many Germans.
And this comes, of course, after tremendous pressure from Germany's allies, particularly within NATO, to finally step up to the plate, as it were, in boosting Germany's military capabilities. Melinda Crane, our chief political correspondent, thank you so much. Now, hundreds of thousands of people have protested against the Russian invasion in cities around the world. Here in Berlin, a huge rally took place at the landmark Brandenburg Gate. There were big demonstrations also in Paris, Madrid, and a string of other capitals. People have been attempting to protest in dozens of Russian cities as well, but they've been met by a police crackdown. A monitoring group says at least 2,000 people were detained standing up against Vladimir Putin's war.
They were chanting "No to War" in Russia from St. Petersburg to Siberia, protesting their country's invasion of Ukraine. And in so many places, the script was the same. Inspired chants followed by action from security forces, often in riot gear. It can't be any worse. We're the aggressor state and people are dying because of us. I'm ashamed. I haven't been able to live normally for several days. I'm burning with shame. Ukrainians well away from Russia were meanwhile burning with pride. Their national anthem played outside the Russian embassy in Berlin. And over at the Brandenburg Gate, police left more than 100,000 people to chide Vladimir Putin and support Ukrainians.
It is our backyard. They are our neighbors, our brothers, our cousins, our co-workers.
Putin is bombing my country, which is Ukraine. He's killing people, killing children.
I wish I could do more, but coming here and showing our solidarity, showing that we really want the people of Ukraine to be safe.
The attack on Ukraine is an attack on us, on all our ideals, just like the Ukrainians have been telling us for the past 8 years.
Such support for Ukraine was also found in cities as varied as Paris, Erbil in Kurdish Iraq, Santiago, Chile, and the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, where expat Belarusians protested their country's support for the invasion, also without police interference. But back inside Russia, in Yekaterinburg, east of the Ural Mountains, the voices of protest quickly muffled.
Well, people around the world protest Putin's war against Ukraine. Many in Russia, of course, are backing the president. Russian media have repeated Putin's claim that the so-called special military operation was a reaction to Ukrainian aggression. Those who attempt to protest, as we saw, are quickly silenced.
A protest that isn't technically allowed to be one and will therefore be broken up here in Moscow. A heavy police presence means that many don't even dare to protest out of fear of arrest.
We don't agree with what's happening. We're in shock. We don't know how to express this because no one listens to us. We are being persecuted and beaten. We're afraid to go out on the street because we're immediately detained. Every word we say is met with hostility. We simply don't get a chance to join a legal protest.
I didn't even try. I've seen how quickly people were detained when they came out with anything. Protesters gathered in around 50 Russian cities on Sunday. The demonstrations were particularly large here in St. Petersburg. Across the country, 2,500 protesters were detained, according to human rights groups. But many Russians support their government. State TV propaganda denies that there is fighting in Kyiv. There's not a word about civilian casualties or attacks on civilian targets. It's not a war at all. People here are collecting aid supplies, but solely for the civilians evacuated to Russia from the separatist regions. Many are convinced that their tanks are riding to the rescue. It's not a war, it's a special military operation against Nazis who have seized power in Ukraine.
But the Ukrainian president is Jewish. How can he also be a Nazi?
We live in surprising times.
Of course I support our Putin. It's not a war, just a special military operation.
Backing for their president from many Russians, while those who oppose him face ending up behind bars.
Well, peace talks between Ukraine and Russia are due to start this morning as Russia's invasion of its neighbors enters its fifth day. The two sides are expected to meet in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doesn't expect a breakthrough, but he's willing to send a delegation to try and end the war. It was calm as the sun rose over the capital, Kiev, though Ukraine said there were sporadic pre-dawn blasts there. And in the second largest city, Kharkiv, Ukraine says it's still in control of all major cities despite the Russian onslaught in many parts of the country. Several residential buildings have been hit, and Ukraine says over 350 civilians have been killed so far. You are watching special coverage of the war in Ukraine here on DW-TV. I'm Terry Martin. The Russian ruble has plunged to a record low, dropping more than 30% against the U.S. dollar. This comes after the U.S. and Europe imposed sanctions aimed at cutting the country off from the global financial system. Long queues of Russians scrambling to withdraw money from cash machines could be seen across the country. In an attempt to prop up the ruble, Russia's central bank doubled its key interest rate to an unprecedented 20% and ordered domestic export companies to sell foreign reserves. The international community is raising its voice against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council has called a rare emergency meeting of the 193-member General Assembly due to take place today. 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of the resolution. Russia voted against the move, while China, India, and the United Arab Emirates abstained. Russia was unable to use its veto to block the resolution since the vote was procedural. The U.S. and its allies at the UN say Russia is becoming isolated internationally.
It is called for an emergency.
The European Union has decided to finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. It's the first time the EU is sending weapons to a country under attack. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc is also closing its airspace to Russian aircraft and will ban state-owned media channels Russia Today and Sputnik. She also announced new sanctions targeting the regime of Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for supporting Russia's invasion. Here's how von der Leyen explained the significance of these developments.
As the war in Ukraine rages on and Ukrainians fight bravely for their country, the European Union steps up once more its support for Ukraine and the sanctions against the aggressor that is Putin's Russia. For the first time ever, the European Union will finance the purchase and delivery of weapons and other equipment to a country that is under attack. This is a watershed moment.
Well, for more, let's bring in our correspondent, Christina Mundwa, in Brussels. Christine, tell us more about how the EU is moving on Ukraine. What do these latest steps mean?
Well, Terry, the significance of this announcement by the European Union to collectively purchase military weaponry, lethal weaponry for the Ukrainian armed forces cannot be understated. As Ursula von der Leyen there, the EU Commission President, said, it is a watershed moment. It's never happened in the European Union's history. In the weeks leading up to this invasion, we have seen individual member states from the European Union making military contributions to the Ukrainian armed forces. But this was bilateral and was no means coordinated at an EU level. In fact, many people did not expect, when we heard the news yesterday, that this was actually going to happen. People assumed, many people, analysts thought the European Union was going to continue to encourage individual member states to support the Ukrainian armed forces. But to take this collective decision was really, really significant. So they're going to be using an instrument that they created called the European Peace Facility. And we understand that money to the tune of about 450 million euros has been set aside to purchase things like lethal ammunition, air defense systems, anti-tank systems that are then going to be given to the Ukrainian armed forces. This EPF, this European Peace Facility, this instrument, was set up last year. It has been in use, for example, supplying the African Union with assistance, but not lethal assistance, not the kind of ammunition that the Ukrainian armed forces will be getting. So certainly very significant, and is expected to bolster the Ukrainian armed forces as they continue to battle the Russians on the ground.
So something of a watershed moment here for European security and foreign policy as well. Now, Ukraine is aspiring to join the European Union. That's part of what all this conflict is about. Assuming that Ukraine retains its independence, Christine, what are its prospects of actually becoming an EU member state?
Well, in the days after the invasion began, some EU member states opened up that conversation. They made public remarks expressing that Ukraine should be granted a path to accession into the European Union. Poland, for example, Slovakia, for example, the Polish president just this weekend. Also this weekend, we heard from the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. She said, and I quote, "They are one of us," referring to Ukraine, and we want them in. Of course, she put a caveat to that to say down the line. You might know, Terry, that in 2008, the Ukrainians did apply for EU membership. That application was unsuccessful for a number of reasons. As quoted by the European Union, they cited the corruption and the need for other reforms. There are some countries already in talks with the European Union right now. Ukraine is not even in talks, but its parliament took the decision in 2017 to adopt a law that made EU membership part of its strategic foreign policy and security policy. It doesn't appear at the moment, Terry, that there are more EU member states who have expressed that keenness, that desire to bring Ukraine into the fold. Of course, there would be implications for the European Union. For example, if Ukraine were to have been a European Union member now, much more would have been needed in terms of perhaps boots on the ground in support of the Ukrainian armed forces. So it does appear that the majority of member states are reserved about that. They've at least not made public remarks, the kind that we've heard from the Polish president, as well as the Slovakian head of state.
So you say the majority of EU member states are reserved about this. So is this crisis in Ukraine, regarding Ukraine, bringing the EU closer together, or is it another source of division?
Terry, the unitedness, if I can call it that we've seen in the European Union on coming to Ukraine's defense, on condemning Russia, has been something that a lot of people have been taken by surprise. In fact, some analysts have gone as far as to say that even Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin didn't budget for that level of coordination and unity among the European Union member states. It was collective condemnation of Russia's actions from the very get-go, collective decisiveness in terms of the reaction that we've seen in the aftermath of this invasion. There have been meeting after meeting here in Brussels, foreign ministers and the heads of state. Some of those meetings virtual, meetings with allies in Washington, the NATO partnership as well. And we've really seen what many call unprecedented unity, even for some member states that have certain issues in the European Union who are known to perhaps lean towards Russia. Even these have come into the fold, not only condemning Russia, but expressing the importance of the European Union. Countries like Hungary, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban coming out and saying that we need to preserve the European Union, that this is our future. And so these are very unprecedented times, and it really has brought the bloc together in a way that many have been taken by surprise by, Terry.
Christine, thank you very much. Our correspondent Christine Munwa there in Brussels.